Here's when I get commissioned at BC. My wife painting on my bars. We're firing 60, it's a 60 millimeter mortar. We're firing rounds out into the rice paddy. That's my area I slept in at when I was opposite, we were at Da Nang on the hill around it. Just a mosquito net around you. That's the area that they used to call it a table of organization out here. This is where I'd fire artillery rounds into this area here. Here's a scout sergeant from the South Vietnamese, Sergeant T. There I am again in my hooch, adjusting the 60 millimeter mortar. You have to come back to the aim and stake, and that would keep it on target. I think that we just got back from a patrol. My instructions always were when I left on a patrol to one of the grunts who was there that I'd give him some money and I'd say, buy a big chunk of ice, and would put the beers in the ice and have it nice and cold for you,
I bet that beer tastes good when you get back, right?
Oh yeah, it did. For more reasons than one. That you were still alive. We're on a Rough Rider here, I believe. Like a Rough Rider was a convoy from Da Nang to Dong Ha, which was about 30 miles. And these are kids that were along the way looking for sea rations and candy and so forth. There I am with the 45, taking a shot at a beer can on the wire or something. Used to get pretty good at that damn thing. I was born July 19th, 1942 in Boston. I grew up in Boston in the suburb of Roslindale. I went to Boston Latin School with my buddy Tom McNeil, and then we went to BC together, and I used to pick him up and drive him. Sometimes he'd drive, but I get into the Marine Corps. I was a freshman at BC, and there was a Marine recruiter on campus at the time. And we went over and just curiosity, we asked what they were doing, and they were signing people up for the PLC program. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's a program whereby you go to 12 weeks of training at Quantico in Virginia, and once you graduate from college, you're commissioned as second lieutenant in the Marines. So that seemed pretty good. I didn't have to go to ROTC or anything and wear a uniform every day at school. So that's what I did. And bottom line is that when I graduated in 1965, I got, let me just think now, I got commissioned by a general in the Air Force, the Army Reserve. In fact, his name was General Ambrose, but that was just a coincidence. All right, so then I took the summer off, and it went by very quickly, and pretty soon before I knew it, I was at the basic school, they call it, TBS, and it's supposed to be 6 months at least training as a second lieutenant in order to take over a platoon or whatever else it might be. But basically it's to be able to take over a platoon of Marines. But as everything else was happening at that period of time, they were rushing people over to Vietnam because the second lieutenants were dying by the dozens over there. and so they try to jump everybody over quickly as possible.
At this point, when you signed up, did you sort of understand that there was the possibility that you were going to go to Vietnam?
No, Vietnam was like a distant rumor at the time. I didn't think anything of it. I hardly knew anything about it. Uh, so it wasn't until we got down there that the word cannon fodder started coming up, and they were the lieutenants were, and as it seemed at the time, as some of them went over there more quickly than the others, going to Vietnam, that is, and would start hearing the drips and drabs of the guys being killed, KIAs, WIAs, and so forth. So we knew what we were up against, and what the dangers were, and it was kind of antiquated. The training I received was basically, I don't know how to describe it other than we had very little jungle training, and they were doing things like, urban warfare, let's put it that way. The only urban warfare, actually, it was rather ruthless, was the battle for Way City, and that was a very strenuous, I think it was the 1st Marine Division that overtook Way, and they took tremendous casualties doing it.
As these guys were going over there, and you signed up with not really understanding you could end up in combat, how did that make you feel?
Made me feel afraid. I was afraid. Naturally, you think about it a lot. It was a reality that we had to face no matter what, especially the people who signed up to be infantry lieutenants. They called them O3s. That was the designation on your MOS as an O3. I eventually ended up as an O8, which was an artillery officer. And I had to go from the basic school out to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, to be trained as an artilleryman, which was a very tough. I was not a math major or anything, but the more math you had in the artillery, the better off you'd be, because it's basically all mathematics. I'm sure it is now too, but at the time, you had to be able to quickly solve problems in your head and so forth. So I was better at being an artillery forward observer, which you adjusted artillery fire according to what the company commander wanted you to do. So primarily I was attached to the infantry commanders, and whatever they said to do, I'd do it, and which means call in artillery to relieve the incident that we may be in and so forth.
It's an important job.
Yeah, it is. It's an important job, and it's a dangerous job. As I mentioned to my son Jim once, if you had a round that came in short or not on the target that you wanted it, and some of your own Marines get injured, right away they'd blame the FO, and it would be a situation that you didn't want to be in that situation. So I thank God I never was involved in anything like that. Anytime I called in a mission, it went, on the enemy's side, and they were the recipients of the artillery as opposed to my own people. But Yeah, so the euphemism for being an artillery forward observer was they'd say you're out on the hill, uh, and that would be the expression you'd see if you saw another artillery guy. You'd say, "How long you been out in the hill?" And they'd tell you and so forth. Usually it was 6 months out in the hill and 6 months back in the battery. But at the time I was in Vietnam, I stayed 7 months or so out in the hill. I never really got back. I was always a forward observer, it seemed, no matter what the circumstances were. So I was with initially the 1st Battalion, 3rd Marines. I was an FO with them. And then they got switched back to Okinawa, which I thought was a good thing, which was going to happen, but they didn't take me. They left me there and made the whole battery go, but they left me and switched me to the 2nd Battalion, 26th Marines, which was stationed down south of Da Nang. It was in a tough area where we never saw any Viet Cong or NVA or anything, but they continually did damage to our company of Marines by, mining the rice paddies that we patrolled. The rice paddies were enormously huge. You couldn't barely see from one end to the other. And if it was during the monsoon season, they'd be flooded more or less, and you'd walk on the dikes, and that's where they'd keep the mines. They call them bouncing Bettys. You ever hear of that? All right, so that's what would happen, and we'd go out and patrol the whole day, and come back into the wire, which was the hill we were on, and we'd have sniper rounds over our heads. Would make us just harass us, but nobody really got hurt in that respect. But if the mines would do a lot of damage, the bouncing Bettys, and that would stop everything. You'd have to get the guy straightened out, get the corpsman in to do his best he can on him as far as repairing his wounds. And other than that, that's what we did for when I was down at south of Da Nang.
Tell me what it was like when you first got there.
When I first got there, it was, I got off the plane. It was a civilian plane. I think it was Continental Airlines. We stepped out of the airplane, and just the heat and the humidity was just god awful. It hit you like a ton of bricks, and that was awful to put up with. And we'd wait around and wait like you do a lot in the military. You just sit around and wait. And finally somebody came out on a Jeep and picked me up and brought me back to it was the battery battalion commander of the artillery battery. And he gave me a little lecture and told me that I was going to see a lot of action, and as if I really wanted to see a lot of action. I was hoping he'd say just the opposite. You're not going to see that much action, but that's how they categorized it. And he told me I would be a forward observer and to practice up on the techniques that I had been taught at Fort Sill. So the bottom line is I would plot what they call H&I coordinates on the map and give them to the fire direction officer, in which they would arbitrarily fire rounds at night to keep the enemy more or less occupied, or just harassing them, and not and not be able to get organized. For instance, you'd plot artillery on intersections, on bridges, and these would do a lot of it'd do a lot of damage, I would think, but I would never see them. They would just fire out, and the round would go out, say 5-6 miles, and it would explode. You'd hear it explode, but you wouldn't know what damage it had done.
Do you remember the first time you went sort of on patrol outside the wire?
Yes. It became boring almost. It'd be like a walk in the sun, and you'd just go out and hump around, loaded with equipment. My equipment and most of the equipment was basically the same, except for a few different weapons as the Second World War and the Korean War Marines had. They called it 782 gear, and the inference was that that's what it cost, $7.82 for all the equipment you got. And so we'd be out there in the patrolling, come back in, have a few beers if we had it afterwards, and try to sleep. And same thing in the morning, get up, and based upon the orders from the commanding officer, would either go out again the next day or just take a day off. But it was always the idea that you're going to go out on patrol. You always were worried about that. There was no getting around it. It was a scary operation, and guys were getting killed left and right. And yet we never saw the VC, who were basically, we were in an area. They call them the La Chaos, C-H-A-U. I think that means the villages. And there was about 5 or 6 of them, and it was loaded with the VC, and a lot of Marines were killed or wounded because of the people who were operating out of that area. I mean, we at the time didn't know, but basically the VC could have been underground the whole time, and we didn't know that. I mean, we didn't realize that they could be that sneaky, so to speak. But as we later got on, I mean, they would disappear by the rivers, underneath the water, and get up underneath the bank and into their tunnel complex in order to avoid being pursued by the Marines. And they were pretty sneaky that way, let's put it that way.
What was your first time in combat like? Do you remember that?
My first time in combat, yes, was on a patrol with, let's say, a company-sized patrol or maybe a platoon-sized patrol. And we'd be out in the middle of the rice paddy, and all of a sudden an automatic weapon would open up, and it may be 500 yards away, but you could feel you could hear the rounds blowing over your head, and everybody would hit the deck. And my job would be to get up to the company commander, and then he'd see me there, and then I'd know. And the thing that was frustrating is that they wouldn't allow me to fire artillery because they were afraid of hurting civilians in the area. So we'd just take the fire and not be able to do anything. A lot of times the Marines would fire back, but they'd, more or less hurt people in the villages and so forth. So that was something they didn't want us to do, was fire back until they knew for sure that there was an enemy patrol in the area or an enemy company or whatever. So.
And when that contact first happens, right, when you hear that machine gun
Yep.
go off, I mean, it's probably hard for the average person to understand, but what goes through your mind? What are you thinking?
Initially, the way I looked at it, it was a moment of panic, but it was very, very short period of time. It may have been only 1 second or 2 seconds where you'd be laying with your face in the paddy water with the rounds whipping over your head. And when the round goes by you, it would crack the air. I think nobody ever really explained it to me, but it would be like breaking the sound barrier around your head. And, you know, it would scare the life out of you. But we just kept going and doing it every day, so to speak. And finally we get out of that area, and I got to be with the 2nd Battalion, 3rd Marines, which was where the incident in Cam Low happened. We were supposed to get to Okinawa to regroup, get new weapons, new clothes, and so forth. And we were all set to go, and everybody was in a pretty good mood. However, it's like, what was that quote you had, Jim? That
Vietnam was filled with nightmares, and this was how they usually started.
exactly, that's really what it was. But so all of a sudden, that somebody comes running around the area where my bed was, and was asking for Lieutenant Ambrose. Tell him to get his butt up to the CP, the command post, as quickly as possible. So right away I knew something was up, that we weren't going to Okinawa, at least that day. But so I ran up to the post. Everything was going a little bonkers up there. People were running around. There were Marines checking their gear, putting rounds into their weapons. They basically had M14s at the time. We didn't transition to the M16 at that point. It wasn't until later, when we got to Quezon, that they transitioned to the M16. But
Did you carry an M14?
I didn't carry a rifle. No, I carried a .45. But you know, I could always pick up an M14 from a guy being wounded or something like that. But that was my favorite weapon at the time, because it's the only thing I knew about. So I'm getting familiar with all the people who were at the CP. I get introduced to this Colonel Ohanesian. Was a great guy. He was the battalion commander, and he introduced himself to me, and he was killed later on in the day with a mortar round. But and then I get introduced to Bakowitz, who was also killed later on. But I didn't know at the time that he had dreamed, if he went north of the Kamlo River, he was going to be killed. That was his dream. And he had asked the S3 or the S2, whatever it is, I forget that designation again, what the chances are of him going to, going north of the Kamlo River. And the S2 told him, no, you don't worry about that. We're going to Okinawa to get refitted and so forth. However, things had changed. So we were off into the fight with Bakowitz with me. And he asked me to put some rounds on a hill called Koksa, Khoxa, I believe. I forget how it's spelled. And I put some rounds up there, and because that was right on the way of our route into the north toward Hill 124, which eventually became our objective. And as we no, we didn't spend the night there. Okay, so we went on. We might have. I forget exactly how it transferred. I don't know if we spent any nights trying to sleep in the pouring rain, but that was miserable trying to do that. You're shivering like a skeleton, and you just couldn't get warm under the poncho. You try to wrap up with my scout sergeant, and we tried to get our warmth, the body heat together, but it really didn't work. So we had to stand up during the operation there. It was in a church that had the top blown off, and that's where the Barkowitz chose to have his command post. So we were all huddled in the church, the headquarters group, and Barkowitz at the time said to me, Ambrose, I want you to box us in here. And so I tried to get my map out, and boxing in would be to have 4 pre-planned artillery rounds on the area there. So if something happened, we got overrun or we were getting attacked, I could just call in the various concentrations. But one thing that was kind of funny as it happened, there was a big gunnery sergeant who was the company gunnery sergeant, and he gave me a swift boot in the ass, because I had my flashlight out and I was trying to get the coordinates down so I could call them in to get the area blocked in. And by the time I got to try to explain it to him, he was off on another direction. He didn't pay any attention to me. So we struggled through the night. It was tough like that at the time, because the rain was so uncomfortable, and the mud and everything else and so forth going on. But we got through the night, and then in the morning we got our orders. We're heading to 124. We're marching along in column, as we called it, one man in front of the other. And prior to that, we had marched as we crossed the Kamlo River. Each Marine had to hold on to the cartridge belt of the one in front of him, so as not to get lost in the melee, and just stay in control. And so we're humping along, and as we start coming up to Hill 124, all of a sudden it was getting boring a little bit. I remember just humping along. Then all of a sudden the ambush opened up with machine guns coming from, I think, 2 directions. It was a U-shaped ambush, and the first Marines got hurt, got cut down, and so right away I had to get up to see Barkowitz and to find out what he wanted to do with the artillery. And as we got up there to him, I saw him off in the distance, well, just maybe 25, 30 feet away, and he had stripped his flak jacket off, taken off his helmet, taken out his .45, and he jumped over the berm we were behind, and right away he was stitched up. He was killed within about a second or so. So right now we have a company without a commander, which is kind of serious, because there's a lack of leadership there. We had 2 second lieutenants. One of them had just been shot really right in the butt, and he was laying on the ground, and he had been given morphine to I'm not sure how morphine makes you feel, but this lieutenant was feeling pretty good, and he came up with this. Down at the basic school, we used to get critiqued after every little mission we were on, and he come up with he said, "I'm ready for my critique now," and everybody started laughing. As crazy as the situation was, everybody kind of laughed at that. But he was flown out of there. A UH-34 helicopter came in back of us to try to evacuate the people who were. We had quite a few wounded laying around being worked on by corpsmen, and you could hear the ping, ping, ping of the automatic weapons hitting the body of the UH-34, and the kid on the UH-34 was firing the M60 machine gun at the NVA, and he was throwing out at the same time boxes of ammunition for us. So that was that period of time. But
So Bakowitz goes down.
yep,
What do you start doing?
right away I realized, hey, you know, we're in a kind of a predicament here now. So I start calling in my artillery as I would have normally did with Bakowitz, and I shifted from Hill 124, which we had pre-planned back at the Camp Carroll. I had been given a concentration on 124, so I shifted from there over to where I estimated the NVA were dug in, and started calling in artillery. And so so what happens was my instructions to them were enemy troops firing automatic weapons, adjust fire, over. And that's how the fire mission went in. And so the rounds came right in where I wanted them. And then from then on, I was beautiful. Now there's really no possibility that any rounds would be shot or the wrong position, and so we started firing for effect. And the rounds were coming from our rear, which I believe was west at the time, right over us, right onto the area where the NVA were located. And we started really pulverizing the area. And we did that for about, say, 2 hours. Okay, and now the lieutenant was evacuated who was looking for a critique. And we had another lieutenant, second lieutenant, which he was a good Marine. He was out, you know, getting his troops together and trying to get some sort of coordination with the rest of the group. And but I don't think he was able to do that. And I was at the time just wrapping up the rounds coming in from my fire mission. So we decided to stop the fire mission and to regroup and get reorganized. And I believe at that time, Pappy DeLong, the bird colonel who took over the battalion, came in with a cigar in his mouth and really squared away Marine. He offered us a lot of confidence. In fact, now we had a good leader amongst us, and he was going to help us get organized there. Anyway.
So does that, for you, when you see that, I mean, there's the confidence element of
Yeah.
all of this. When you get ambushed, I mean, you got ambushed. the captain was killed,
Yep.
and it's you and a bunch of guys that have to figure your way out of the situation.
Yeah, and nobody was actually doing that because we didn't really have an officer who was in charge of the troops at the time. And then one thing I forgot, that we had a FAC with us, forward air controller, and he brought in two Phantom jets, what McNeil used to fly, and they came by, made a short run around, circled, and they were low, probably the treetop height there, and then they came blasting in with whatever. They weren't machine guns. What were they, Jim? They have on there?
Well, they'd have gun pods, right, under the wings.
Yeah, that's what they had, gun pods at the time, and they'd come in firing those things, and they made one or two passes, and that was it. They took off.
Was it effective?
Quieted things down a little bit. Yeah, after that, the firefight sort of diminished. There was nobody firing back at us, so we assumed that we had at least shut them out for a while. Then we had to reorganize and get out of there and get back to Camp Carroll, because the mission to get us to Okinawa was still in effect. But when we started to do that, it was brought to our attention that a corpsman and another Marine were missing. That's a no-no with the Marine Corps. You gotta account for all your people. So Pappy got us organized, and we went in and we found the corpsman who was dead, and I believe there was another Marine who was killed also, and we found him. So we accounted for all our people. We got them on a helicopter and get their bodies back to Da Nang for processing and so forth. And after that,
Let me ask you: Do you ever get used to seeing something like that, or what is it? How does it feel when you see fellow Marines killed like that?
do I ever get used to it? No, you never get used to it, to seeing dead Marines. But it's tough to get used to. In the way they die, the Marine was, in the short period of time, rigor mortis had set in, and his hands were in the air like that, and he was stiff. But we got him out of there, and you don't think about it at the time. You don't have any reason to think about it. You just forget it and quickly as you can. And I think things like that I put into the recesses of my mind, especially the thing like the ambush. I had forgotten all about that till Jim brought it out of me. Asking me what type of situations I had got myself into over there, what we had got ourselves into, and it was always a mess trying to find out what happened to people. The ambush itself causes panic amongst everybody. Initially, people are down and they're on the ground, falling around, but again, your training kicks in, and you see what you should be doing. Initially, on an ambush, if the ambush is from the right, Marines are supposed to attack to the right. If it's from the left, we're supposed to attack to the left, even though we're taking incoming fire. That it's overwhelming at times, but that's why it takes people to get to that point who are able to do it. That's what Congressional Medals of Honor are made out of. Guys do it and they don't get hit, and you got to be like Audie Murphy or somebody who.
Well, with your job specifically, right? You couldn't just stay down. You had to get to the captain.
Yeah, no, I had to get to the captain. That was the main task that I had, and then he would. But I had no captain to go to at that particular time,
But it's sort of counterintuitive, right? As soon as the shooting starts, you have to move.
You got it. Yeah, I can't just lay there. You have to move. You have to get up to somebody in authority and try to solve the problem. Is basically what it is. There's a problem. Nobody is around to give orders. What would you do normally? And I determined that it was my job to call in the artillery, regardless of Barkowitz being there or not. I had to get some artillery onto the objective and stop the NVA from getting us further, because of their position they were in and the position we were in on the other side of the berm. We had to be sure we were going to be safe, and we didn't want anybody overrunning us. So that's why we got that artillery in as quickly as possible. So after that, we get back to Camp Carroll, and we made our way to Okinawa. We spent 30 days there.
That must have been great.
Oh, it was beautiful. I mean, imagine the disappointment we had when we felt that we weren't going to even be going there. As an officer, Okinawa was a grand scheme of things. You were basically on your own. You had nobody looking for you. You could get chow anytime you want. You could drink beer whenever you wanted. And we were at a place called Camp Hansen, which was the one of the camps on Okinawa. So that was a lot of fun. Yeah, we enjoyed ourselves there. We went back to Vietnam. We were very afraid now, because, at least I was, because we were going to a place called Khe Sanh, which was an air base to the far west of Vietnam, not far from a special forces camp called Lang Vay, which was constantly being pulverized and overrun, and it was just miserable. And we got there we landed at Khe Sanh, got off the C-130s, and immediately went to a pre-prepared area for us to be involved in. And from then on, and I didn't have to be required to be a forward observer. They left me back in the rear with the battery, but they left me back there, so I didn't have to go out up to 881 north and south there, which was a horrendous fight. A lot of my friends, lieutenants, were killed on that operation, and but all I did was sit back. I hate to say sit back, because I was on edge. I waiting any second to be called up as a forward observer because the casualties were enormous, and we saw them all at the west end of the runway. They'd be laying all the Marines out under ponchos, dead, and waiting for them to be able to get medevaced out of there. Not medevaced, there was no need. The people who were wounded were being taken care of, but these guys were all dead, and there was a lot of dead Marines up there. That now the NVA were, right in view all the time. They weren't underground or anything like that, although they were underground later on when the siege of Khe Sanh happened. They were underground trying to get up underneath the wire and so forth to attack and overcome the... but I wasn't on that operation, so...
What does it feel like? I mean, a lot of the more recent wars, right, it's very rare to see enemy combatants. But in Vietnam, I mean, it sounds like you were getting used to seeing them up close.
Well, not really. You didn't see too many of them. Although at the 881 North and South, the first battle of Khe Sanh, I talked to a lot of the lieutenants and troops that were there, and they would see them coming at them. They would see them getting killed. They came out to try to retrieve the bodies of the people who were killed, and it was a tough fight. It was enormous fear and responsibility for the, and there were a lot of guys who made names for themselves. This one particular fellow, Lieutenant Cannon, was a friend of mine, and he won the Silver Star up there. He was a Mustang, which was a guy who was brought out of the enlisted ranks and made a lieutenant. So he took an M60 machine gun and on one side of the hill, and he started firing toward 881 North, which was another hill, and he was cutting down NVA, and they just didn't know what to do. They couldn't kill him, they couldn't get him, but he won a Silver Star for that maneuver. He was a tough nut, this guy.
You should mention David Hackett, too.
Yeah, David Hackett was a good friend of mine from PLCs. He was killed by a sniper. He was a platoon commander, and he was a friend of, what's the name of the guy that recently...
I forget his name, but he was an All-American lacrosse player from Princeton, this guy Hackett, and he was the #1 guy at your basic school.
Yeah, he was. He won a silver in '45 because of it. And
You saw him just as he was stepping off to go up to the fight, right?
yes, I was up there. I was up there thinking I was going to be going along with them, but I was told to stay and be on standby in case they needed an FO up there. But yeah, I saw David, and I found out later that he was killed by a sniper. A lot of my friends that I made at the basic school were killed. I know at least 7 of them I counted the other day, in thinking I'd be telling you about it, but yeah, 7 guys I know of were killed. One was a tank commander. Most of them were platoon commanders. They say the average life expectancy of a young second lieutenant in a firefight in Vietnam was like, I don't know what it was, 19 seconds or something like that. A very, very short period of time.
So, as you hear about your friends being killed, I mean, what goes through your mind about sort of your own mortality? Do you think about being killed a lot, or is it something that you just learn to put out of your
Well,
mind?
after a while, you just get numb over there. You know, you don't really think too much about it. I found that out that your training kicks in before anything, and it's really not. You're almost happier to be in a situation like that than to than to be afraid. When the situation brings itself on, like the operation, the beginning of an ambush, you say to yourself, geez, what am I going to do if that happens to me? But you find that you react accordingly as long as you let yourself go. Some guys didn't do it, but you just go along with what you've been taught and what your instincts bring you to do because of the situation you're in, like the ambush. What you're going to do? What am I going to do now? So that was the first hill fight at Vietnam, and the first hill fight was the first stage of Khe Sanh.
What was your experience at Khe Sanh? Like, did you go out on any patrols, or?
No, never any patrols, but I heard about Ghost Patrol. There's a thing called the Ghost Patrol where several Marines, which probably a platoon-sized patrol, was sent out from the wire. And the NVA, you got to remember now, had closed in pretty close to all the wire and everything. So any place near the wire was ambush country, and the Ghost Patrol was ambushed, and everybody, I think, was killed or wounded in that particular patrol. So they basically they never let anybody else get outside Khe Sanh again. We strictly became an artillery duel with the NVA shooting in and was shooting out. But I just heard that about Khe Sanh from a distance. I wasn't there at all during that time. I think we're back on our hill at Camp Carroll, just waiting to react to whatever was going on. We were Operation Hastings. That was the first operation I was on, and that was a fairly large operation. The 324th B Division was invading South Vietnam, and they sent the 3rd Marine Division up there to intercept them. And this time, just a little anecdote. When we went there to intercept them, they had already run, basically. So when we took the hills that they had occupied, we found all sorts of beautiful Czechoslovakian sniper rifles, machine guns and so forth. And they told us, we were all holding on to them, had them strapped to our backs and everything. And they said, you got to leave them here, put your name on them, and as soon as you get back, you'll be able to pick them up, which was a lot of baloney. So they kept them all, We never saw them again. Let me think of what else happened. Oh, yeah. When we were climbing up the hills, wicked, strenuous, almost vertical hills we had to go up, and as you went up, you saw, as I call it, cookie cutter fighting holes dug into the ground that only a Vietnamese small guy could fit into, and they just looked like they had, just made a biscuit out of the ground, and it looked comforting almost to see them there, but they were, thank God there was nobody in the holes. And on the way up the hill, we're walking through elephant grass. You couldn't really see the Marine in front of you. I was holding on to their, their web belts. And all of a sudden, an NVA soldier stands up in front of me, right out. I mean, you couldn't even see him, but he stands up in front of me. All he's wearing is a shirt that's all ragged. He's naked except for the shirt on. His testicles are hanging out. He had been hit by artillery, and he was begging relief. He was on his knees, blessing himself and everything. And I didn't know what to do. He surprised me, and it didn't scare me really because he was helpless. But the Marine sergeant behind me took him, and they whisked him away to the S2 for debriefing. He'd get debriefed by the intelligence officer. Never knew what happened to him. I asked, but I never found out what happened to him.
Was that the closest you would have been to sort of a live enemy soldier?
Yeah, that's the closest I've ever been to a live one, yeah. Although I've been at Cam Low, there was, every time I put my head up over the beam, the berm, there were well-armed rounds in my direction snapping by your head, which you just can't describe it. It makes a wicked loud snapping noise, and you can almost feel it go by your head. But that's as close as I came. You were always an object of a sniper, a second lieutenant, anybody with a radio operator behind you. He's got to be some important officer or something, so they're going to try to hit you.
And of course, you had to see where the rounds were landing. Right?
Yeah, right. You had to see where they hit, and I had to get my head up over the berm to see where the rounds hit, and then get right back down and make an adjustment as quickly as possible, which I didn't really have to because the planning back at Camp Carroll was so excellent that that shift from the concentration on Hill 124 was so accurate that the rounds came right in on target, and they did their job. Yeah, we had this company commander. He knew I was short timer, and a short timer was just somebody who had only a couple of weeks left or whatever in Vietnam. But this guy was popping rounds at us. We were in an artillery battery in an area, I think south of Da Nang, and he was behind a gravestone, and he was snapping rounds at us. I don't know how close they were coming or not, but the company commander called me up and he said, "I want you to go down and adjust artillery on that guy. I'm going to let the Marines fire, direct fire here." So I went out with a radio operator and we sprinted out. The guy was about 500 yards away. We sprinted out, hit the deck. I called in artillery round, and then I called in another couple of rounds, and the firing stopped. So then I went back to the battery, but that was kind of an adventurous. I was thinking of that the other day. I could have been easily killed. And normally when a guy was a short timer, you cut him a little slack. You wouldn't make him do something like that, But he wanted me to go out and try to kill this guy, waste an artillery round on him. But
So that was your last week. What was it like coming home?
Yeah, getting home was great. Getting on the airplane, and everybody cheered when the thing took off. and we flew right to Travis Air Force Base in California. And I tell you, I wasn't really accepted there. They weren't the crowd that was there, or anybody that here to see their the sons or brothers or whatever, were very. There were a lot of people making snide remarks and everything. So, but I just got out of there. I
Would that
left.
have been anti-war protests?
Yeah, anti-war protests, yeah, whatever they were. They were just liberal. The liberal group there were against the Vietnam War. I think at the time the people had been killed at college.
Kent State?
Kent State, right. They had, during that period of time, it was really getting gross. They were.
Did that affect you at all?
Yeah, we heard it. We heard that the people back home weren't supporting us. We didn't like that at all. And however, you had nothing you could do. You had to either take the idea that you're nothing I can do, and just forget about it. As
So how did the whole thing change your sort of perspective on life, on
it wasn't that I wasn't that deep into it. I mean, that was something that I knew I had to do. I was going to get drafted, or else I went as an officer rather than as a enlisted man, and I felt I had done my job, and there wasn't anything that I would regret saying I did. And I thank God that I was able to do my job without causing anybody to get killed or hurt. And so that's basically it.
do you still think about your time in Vietnam often?
Yeah, I don't think a day goes by that I don't think about it. It was a tough time in my life, let's put it that way. It was hard, and it was rough over there, just the living conditions. The mud and the rain. The rain, it couldn't be more miserable as you're sitting here without the umbrella here, and just the pouring rain. It would rain so hard you couldn't see. The monsoons would be on you. Everything would be soaked, and you'd just get everything would be, especially your feet would get rotted, because usually your boots were worn out by that time. I had the same boots I wore, issued in June of '66, till a year. I had them for a year, and I remember my toes sticking out, and I still have them down at the Cape House. But they were good boots, though. One of the good things about Vietnam is that they had boots that had little drain plugs in them. I don't know if you ever saw them. And the water would run out, so if you stepped in the rice paddy, it would fill up with water, but instead of staying in your boot all day, it would gradually run out through the drain pipe there. So, and of course you had to watch out for the punji stakes, which they had them all over the place.
Leeches.
Oh, leeches, yeah, that was awful. You'd go across like for instance, crossing the Cam Lo River, you'd have to be up to your neck anyway. And you get across, and then you start feeling things on you, and there'd be leeches sucking on you. and you'd have to take out a cigarette or something and burn them off you. You'd have to have guys do it. You'd have to strip down, and that was terrible. It was something that I never liked, that leeches being on me.